Whakataka te hau, whakataka te hau ki te kina ki uta, kia mātara ki tai. E hi ake ana te hau, ti Morena, welcome everybody to today's meeting. As usual, if councillors, if you need to leave the meeting, please let myself or a Democracy Advisor know. Morning tea will be at 10:30. And I just want to check if there are any apologies. So far, I have an apology for lateness from Councillor O'Neill and a possible early departure from Councillor Wolfe, depending on when we finish. So Councillor Wolfe needs to leave at around the middle of the day. So are there any other apologies? Carl? Okay. So now I just need a seconder for those apologies. Thank you, Councillor Fitzsimons. Now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. And so please vote accordingly. Thank you, Mayor Foster. So that's been carried. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to items on the agenda. No, there are none. Confirmation of minutes. I move the motion that Strategy and Policy Committee approve the minutes of the meeting held on 17th of February 2021, having been circulated, and that they be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Foon. So I now put the motion which has been moved and seconded. Please vote accordingly. So that's been carried. There are no items not on the agenda. And so we get straight underway with public participation. So we have a few public participants today speaking to us on a number of topics. So we will now begin with Milan, who is coming to speak to us about Shelley Bay. Welcome, Milan. Thank you for coming in. Come and join us at the table. So Milan, you have 5 minutes to speak to us this morning.
Good morning, councillors. I'm Milan Lazarevic from Mount Victoria. I must admit I'm a bit nervous, but as I look around the table, I can see a lot of familiar faces. I can see Nicola Young there, who I discussed at various electoral meetings, the 6,400 that she accepted from Castles, which she has never given back, which I thought she would have to give back as a conflict of interest to avoid that. But anyway, so who else have we got here?
Milan, I'd like it if you could speak to the topic that you're here about and not take off individual councillors and speak about them, please.
Well, I'd like, to be able to express what I want to share. It's policy and strategy is your topic, and this does relate to policy and strategy. It's just the image the council holds, having conflicts of interest, but nevertheless voting on various issues. And also, when people make submissions, the council is not very receptive to it. Like, for example, I brought this T-shirt, which has got Tamafa 4, absolute knob, 6, 7, 8. Because...
Point of order.
I uphold that point of order. I have asked you to be respectful and not pick off individual councillors. So if you do continue to do this, I will need to ask you to stop your submission.
Well, I would argue that
please speak on the issue, not on the people. Focus on the issue. Right.
Well, I would have liked to have said more on that, but I don't want to be evicted at this stage.
Thank you, Milan.
So, councillors, as a matter of policy and strategy, you need to take a stand on the occupation, the Maori occupation of Shelley Bay land, council land, but you haven't. There hasn't been a single word of on the occupation, other than Andy coming along and straightening up a tent pole. You haven't said a word for over 100 days. And yet it's the biggest Maori occupation in Wellington, certainly in my lifetime. and yet no one's saying a single word. So in effect, you are the odd one out, and you do need to take a stand so we can understand how you fit in the strategy, the policy. Everyone else has taken a stand. Like Mawhenua, you know, they pitched their tents on Shelley Bay, they've planted their veggie garden, they've stacked their winter woodpile high, and others have also taken a stand. Like even Castles has said, we respect Mawhenua's right to protest. And if you go on to the Minister of Race Relations, he has stated it's an internal iwi matter, and yet your silence thunders because you haven't said a single word. And as I said, even our respected Mayor has straightened up the tent poles at the other end. The rest of you councillors, other than superhero Sean Russ, you haven't uttered a single word. You're not even considering the Shelley Bay occupation on your agenda. Like, I exchanged some emails that maybe some of you actually read with Diane, and she said it's not on the agenda, it's not something we're considering, it's not even something we're looking at considering. And I think that's appalling. You know, people have occupied that land and you're not taking a stand. And I'd like to ask you, how many people here, councillors, have actually visited the occupation site? If you could hold up your hand. So that's 3. And you know, it's absolutely appalling why the rest of you haven't bothered to go there. The biggest Maori occupation of land in half a generation, and you won't comment on it, you don't go there to get, say, on-the-ground information. Why are you being paid $111,000 and you're not going there, engaging, participating with these people? Okay, so I better keep going. So this is our biggest and most significant occupation in our lifetime. Take your stand so our city can see who the city leaders truly are and which pockets of interest carry them along. Ratepayers facing a 14% rates increase deserve no less. Thank you for being such great listeners. If you want to sing a little song, as is your council tradition, I believe during council meetings, a number of you stand up and sing a song.
Point of order, disrespectful.
Please feel free.
I think that comes to an end now. So thank you, Milan, for coming in to Kōrero with us today.
Can I have another minute?
No, because you've run out of time now, so it's
All
5
right.
minutes.
Thank
Thank you. All right, I'd like to now welcome James and Miriam Bishop from Newlands Paparangi Progressive Association. They're coming to talk to us about public transport flow and availability having a priority in social housing in Newlands and Wellington City Council services. Thank you for coming in again. To see you.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing us again. Good morning, Mayor and councillors and members of the public. My name is Mary Ann Bishop, Newlands Paparangi Progressive Association Secretary and Treasurer, and my husband Jim is the President. I'd like to thank the councillors again, the Northern Ward councillors, Jill Day, Malcolm Sparrow and Jenny Condy for their support in the Newlands area. Newlands, as you're aware, is a very growing area and we need some investment to cater to the growing population. One thing I have on the agenda is public transport, and I know Wellington City Council doesn't deal with all public transport, some of it's Greater Wellington Regional Council, but we feel with the growing population that we need to ensure that the public transport flows properly in the area and thought put into the bus routes, especially as new housing areas open up. It's no good encouraging people, obviously, to use public transport if the service isn't available for them to use. We notice ourselves personally that there's some time during the week when we can't get a bus just getting from Newlands to Johnsonville, and that is from 4:29 to 6:48, Monday to Friday, and that's really weird because we can't go to a local restaurant, supporting local businesses and have a drink or anything because we can't get public transport home. We have to get a taxi. So if it's affecting us, it's affecting other people in the area. You may be able to get 2 buses, but to just get 1 bus for convenience, it's not possible. And also, we also feel, and I did a submission about this recently, that there's areas in Wellington, not just Newlands, where it would benefit having just one-way parking on one side of the road so that there's more room for buses to pass and that, because when we travel on the bus, it's like, I don't know how these bus drivers do it, they're amazing. and on hilly areas, it's even worse, and we've got lots of hills in Newlands. But yeah, social housing, obviously because a lot more people are moving out to the suburbs, there needs to be a lot more investment in social housing, and we wonder whether there's plans, whether council has plans to increase the social housing. We do have some social housing flats in Bachelor Street, Newlands, and we would like to know whether there's any plans on investing any money on those flats and whether they're still fit for purpose and whether they meet the current rental requirements even. I know there was some work done a wee while, some years back, painting and that, but, you know, places need a little bit more than a slap of paint on them sometimes. And there is an increased need for social housing because of a lot of families being in poverty, etc., and not being able to afford market rents and that. So we would like to know what the plans are around that. And Wellington City Council services, where we don't have a lot of problems, we get a lot of communication from Wellington City Council, which we really appreciate. But one thing that I'd like to bring to attention, which Councillor Jill Day knows about, is I had a member in our community who had put in a request to have a light fixed in the Newlands Shopping Centre, Macmillan Court, in August 2019. He told me about it in February 2020 because it still hadn't been fixed and he was getting a bit frustrated. So I took up chasing it up all the time, and I contacted Jill Day quite a few times just to see who to contact and that. It took 14 months to get that light fixed, and a couple of times we were told it was fixed, and when I went to check it, it wasn't fixed. So we had to chase it up again. 14 months is a long time to get a light fixed. So there needs to be a little bit more communication, obviously, between the council staff and the contractors, and vice versa, but we got it fixed in the end. That's all I have to say, and I'm happy to take questions.
Kia ora. There is a question. There's a pātai from Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you. Look, I'm really sympathetic to your points about the public transport services, and we're doing what we can to make them run smoother on the roads. But the services themselves and the timetables are Greater Wellington's responsibility, and you can consult. They've got their plan out for consultation, and did you know you can actually make a submission up until the 19th?
Jim was on a workshop or something the other day with them. Yeah.
Great.
Councillor Sparrow.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marion. In terms of social housing, obviously Bachelor Street flats could do with a major upgrade, but you say you would like to see more. Are there any particular areas, any particular location you think is a possibility? Because obviously space in terms of where is pretty limited, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean there needs to be more in the northern region somewhere because a lot more people are coming out that way, and if they don't have housing, where do they go? Sleep in their cars? But yeah, I know I don't know what land council owns, so or has the availability to own.
Thinking as to
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, just picking up on that point, I guess I'm interested in your view about whether the future of the housing provision from the City Council should include social, affordable, and maybe even some kind of high-end apartments or houses all within the same place, like sort of the mixed community type model.
Yeah, I was saying to Jim, I'm sure all the ones in Bachelor Street are like bed sitters. So where do people go for like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, family houses, whatever? So it would be good to have a mixture. I think there's a couple of housing corp houses in Newlands, and I think there's a couple in a complex in Johnsonville. But yeah, a good mixture would be good, yeah.
Mayor Foster.
Thank you very much for that. Just following on, you made the comment there about the retailers being upset with Bachelor Street flats. So obviously there's something going on with behaviour. Can you just elaborate a little bit on what's going on with behaviour and if there's something there that's not quite working?
2 words, Your Worship.
Yeah.
And it,
And they're putting the finger on Bachelor Street flats. Yeah.
Because that's where.
Okay. No, thank you.
Ngā mihi kia korua. Thank you very much for coming in to share your
Thank you. Have a
thoughts
good
and
day.
experiences. We appreciate taking the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Brian Mudge now, who is coming to talk to us about public nuisance caused by the emission of foul odour from a restaurant. So, welcome, Brian. So, Brian, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, excuse me, but the other person who is to talk following me has been delayed. I'm not sure we can put his session later.
If it falls within the time of our public participation, I'll be able to make that work, but if it's
Thank you.
outside of that, I won't. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. You're now being presented with 2 timelines, Timeline 1 and Timeline 2. I'm the Body Corporate Chair of Republic Apartments in Tennyson and Lawn Streets, Te Aro. The issue I'm raising is the continued failure by council officers to address problems created by the ongoing discharge of foul odour and cooking matter from Aries Restaurant onto Lawn Street, and the prospect of increased insurance premium and the possibility of a fire as a result of non-compliance with the building code. The restaurant does not have a current certificate of code compliance. Unfortunately, this meeting is the only forum that is available to me to bring to Council's attention the ongoing failure of council officers to take action to get the restaurant to comply with the building code. I'm aware of the division between operational and governance, but if the operational sector fails to act in accordance with the level of competence mandated, then the governance arm, which is yourselves, must step in. In this case, council officers continue to put the interests of one ratepayer ahead of the interests of over 140 ratepayers. Must take action. Now, the timeline's setting out the actions taken by the parties, and one includes photographs have been or are now being distributed to you, and I have copies of correspondence with council officers' timelines that have been presented to the CEO that are available for any of the councillors who wish to take the matter further. And I do apologise, it is a possibly complex issue, and I excuse the language that may have been used. Now, to briefly summarise, council officers issued a building consent for the restaurant requiring discharge of effluent to a high level, 6 metres from any inlet, boundary or national and natural ventilation opening. The extract duct and discharge point as constructed didn't comply with the building consent or the building code. However, building inspectors failed to inspect the discharge point or the installation of clean access points and issued a certificate of code compliance anyway. In particular, from the time the restaurant opened for business in 2017-2018, residents have complained of the foul odour pervading the Republic complex and the discharge onto Lawn Street of cooking matter and foul odour. And this have been made by telephone and email complaints to council officers. And in particular, I refer you to Andrew Taylor, who is the health officer of council, his letter of February 2019, which is on page 1 of the timeline 1, when he confirms that he and his offsider, Louise, have visited the complex on a number of occasions and found the foul odour pervading the entry foyer going up to the car park and on Lawn Street. I also refer you to the second point of 10th of May 2017, which is also on page 1 of timeline 1. Due to the intransigent position and repeated assertions by officers the council could not act, the body corporate made application to MIMBI for a determination. The determination was issued on 20 July 2020 and reversed the Certificate of Code Compliance, July 2020. Council officers reversed the Certificate of Code Compliance and on 20 July 2020 issued a notice to the restaurant to fix by the 20th of October.
Your time's running out, so if you can just try and finish off now, please.
Well, all right, it's all there for you to read for yourselves.
Unfortunately, Brian applied as an individual.
There was a misunderstanding. I said I would be appearing myself. He took that as being an individual, not a...
I'm okay with extending the time as you are here representing the body corporate, so you can have another 5 minutes.
All right, so the notice to fix has not been complied with, and council officers continue to issue continued CPUs, certificates of public use, thus allowing the restaurant to operate even though it doesn't have a current certificate of code compliance. No action has been taken by council officers to enforce the notice to fix, and the discharge of foul odour causing nuisance continues, as does the possibility of fire in the extract duct. Despite ongoing approaches to council officers regarding the discharge of the odour and cooking matter causing nuisance to both, not only the Republic apartments, we now have complaints from DeVere, which is on the adjoining property. The council officers, apologies, continue to show unjustified leniency to the restaurant business over the issue. There is serious concern by the body corporate committee and insurers about the possibility of fire in the extract duct due to non-compliance with code compliance for cleaning access panels. The residents want urgent action to resolve the matter. So I am now requesting that immediate action be taken by council to revoke the CPU, which is in force until the 29th of March, and enforce the notice to fix, thus preventing the restaurant from operating until such time as it receives a valid certificate of code compliance. That may seem harsh, but they should have put the extract system in accordance with the building consent back in October 2017. And the council officers failed to check the installation. I'd like the ward councillors for the Republic Complex, being Iona Pannett, Tamartha Paul and Nicola Young, to take action to ensure that the ratepayers in the ward no longer suffer the nuisance of the discharge of foul odour and cooking matter from the restaurant, the possibility of fire in the extract duct, and there is the real possibility of increased charges and insurance premium, all of which is a result of council officers' failure to carry out their duties to the required standard. Now, unfortunately, John Kettle, I don't think has arrived.
There are some questions if you would be okay.
Can I just finish? Because when John does appear, he is bringing a petition signed by over 150 residents seeking action from council. So if people do have questions or require copies of correspondence that has been exchanged with officers, happy to oblige.
Thank you. So we do have a couple of questions. First of all, Councillor Fitzsimons and Councillor Young.
Thank you for your comprehensive description of what's gone on here. I just have a question really about whether there is goodwill from the body corporate to try and find a solution that allows the restaurant to keep operating. Does that goodwill exist? Are you keen to, find a way through this in terms of the ducting?
Have made approaches to the previous agent for the restaurant. I suggested what could be done, how it could be done. He did nothing. That's why we went to MIMBY. When the MIMBY draft determination came out, which was unfavourable for the restaurant, they changed agents to an engineer called Stephen Young. He has not, I've met with him, tried to explain what could be done. We've offered assistance. They put a proposal. We said, we will agree to it if you do these 6 points. Nothing has happened, and that was end of last year. They failed to take any action, and as I said, the council officers, I believe, I got an email late Tuesday afternoon that they are actually having a meeting with the restaurant this morning to discuss a possible alternative solution, but it's taken over 12 months for that to occur.
But the body corporate there's goodwill there in trying to find a way through this.
Provided we will agree to any solution that avoids the nuisance, but it's going to be extremely difficult because they failed to do it in the outset, and now the complex has been up for 10 years.
Councillor Young.
So, contrary to what you think, actually I have been in contact with the officers quite a bit over this. I walk past that regularly. In fact, my son used to own an apartment in that complex, so I'm well familiar with it. The smell has improved enormously. It was vile, no doubt about that, and it has improved a bit, quite a bit. But what I'm interested in is the smell has been there ever since the restaurant opened as Happiness, and then it changed hands to Aries. So do they own the freehold?
It's the same shareholders, owners. Happiness, Aries are the same parties, just they changed the name when Happiness closed down, but it is still the same owners who own the unit and own the restaurant. Happiness, Aries, one and the same. Right. For all intents and purposes.
Okay, so thank you. That's good to have that clarified. So what I don't understand is, I mean, Aries is a terrific restaurant. Yeah. It's just the smell is a problem, but it just seems to me that your plans would punish the restaurant for something which is not their fault. I mean, it comes back to the original code of compliance.
No, that is totally incorrect. The owners are relying upon ventilation that was provided to service possibly an office, retail, commercial unit, not a industrial kitchen, and they've got far too many cookers in beyond what was specified in the building consent. And if I can get technical, the building consent allowed for 6,260 litres per second of discharge. They're currently at about 7,500 litres per second discharge. For 1,000, at the moment, the discharge is over 1,000 litres per second. It must go 6 metres beyond any entry boundary.
I'll just need to get you to wind up now because time has really run out. We've gone well over.
Right. Well, but we will.
Thank you.
No, in council, I come back. Council officers failed when the application for.
We have very much heard your point, and I think I do need to make sure that other people get their chance to do their submission. But thank you, Brian, for coming.
All right. As I said, the petition will be presented.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't know what's delayed them.
And just to check that John is not here yet, he's just walked in the door. That was pretty amazing timing.
I'm finished. Yeah, I've been told off.
How did he go? That's good.
All right, John. John, so welcome to the meeting.
Sorry, hello.
You have, I'm the councillor, Councillor Jill Day, the chair. Yeah. So welcome. You have 5 minutes to do your submission, right. And if there are any questions, it needs to fit within that time. Thank you.
Hi, Simon. How are you? Good. I'm principally here representing the residents of the building at 10 Lawn Street and 11 Tennyson Street, otherwise known as the Republic Apartments. I took it upon myself to conduct a petition, which I've got here. I knocked on everyone's door, so there's about 130 apartments there. I didn't get, some doors weren't answered, but everyone that I approached pretty much were very happy to sign this. In fact, some people were grabbing it off me so they could sign it, and that basically represents the fact that no one is happy with the smell on the street from the restaurant. And as a committee member of the body corporate, I am continually hassled by residents in the building when I'm in the lobby, wanting to know what we're doing about getting the smell sorted out. And we don't have a problem with the restaurant, but we do have a problem with the odour. And it is causing grief to people. It's going into the building, it's going up and into the apartments. One of the worst situations in the summer when it's hot, you do remember that, don't you? You can't open your doors, you can't open your own sliders because the smell will come into your apartment. And it's been an insidious thing. It's been going on now for a number of years, and it's getting further and further into the building. What was really interesting is that we've got two sides to the building. One where the smell comes out on Lawn Street, the other side on Tennyson Street, which is the same side as the restaurant, and faces the other way, doesn't get the smell. But everyone in that building has a problem with it as well because it's in the car park, and it does create flies in the summer and things like that. So we really just want the council to do something about it if they can. Now, the reason for this petition and why I decided to go ahead and do this was the fact that I was collared by someone in the lobby, as I often am, about doing something about it. And it occurred to me that I had heard that the council had been to inspect the problem at the restaurant, and the answer to that was that it was okay because it wasn't affecting any of the patrons in the restaurant. But the issue is a lot wider than that. And honestly, I thought that was a fairly lame response from the council, and I thought there's time to do something about it. So here I am. Here's my petition. I've got 113 signatures from 130 apartments. So if that doesn't tell you that the people in the area aren't happy with it, Simon, can you do something about it, please?
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, John.
Certainly.
We do have a question for you from Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, sorry.
Welcome to take a seat, sorry, if you want to.
I've been trying to get a park for the last 15 minutes, so I'm a bit frazzled, and here I am.
You've done well, thank you.
I want to ask you the same question as I asked the earlier speaker. Is there goodwill from the body corporate to find a way through that allows the restaurant to keep operating and to address the issues in terms of the ducting? So another option? Are people open to trying to work with them constructively?
No, we're not upset with the restaurant. We just don't like the smell. It's as simple as that. But they don't seem to want to do anything about it. It's going to cost them money, obviously. They are employing devices to extract the air which aren't adequate. I don't know whether they were sold a dummy or whatever the situation was there. But, yeah.
So there is goodwill with the body corporate to try and find a way to address the ducting?
We bump into them in the corridors and things like that all the time, so everyone's civil.
And you want to find a solution, though?
Absolutely,
You're open to that? Yeah, cool.
We have a few more questions, so we'll see if we can track through them quickly. Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks, John. So the petition talks about it being a problem for the last 3 years. So was it okay before then? And is this something that happens all day and evening, or just sort of the evening or around lunchtimes? Or?
Oh, it's sporadic, but it can happen 7 days a week, no problem at all. The restaurant wasn't there to start with, by the way, so that site was vacant, and then the restaurant started up. It's had 2 machinations now, so it's just been creeping into the building. Yep.
Thank you, and we'll get Mayor Foster. Can you ask yours very quickly?
So I presume the restaurant started in 2017, which is
that'd be right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the sort of nature of the physical improvement that needs to be done? Do you have any idea of?
Well, Brian's the guy to answer that question.
I'll ask him later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the ducting that they've got is inadequate. it doesn't, the amount of air that's going through that needs to go through there, that's too small a device for it to be able to operate effectively.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, John, and I'm pleased that you managed to make it here in time to talk with us today. Thank you for taking the time to do so.
Lovely.
Well, thank you, kia ora. I'd like to welcome Tony Randall to the table. Tony's going to speak on item 2.2. Good to see you again, Tony. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. So I'm come here looking at the proposal for the Maori ward. I want to raise, I have some concerns about it. I do not think that it is a good idea from a democratic perspective. And there are three particular areas I want to raise. First of all, it's very unclear what the problem is. Where the lack of representation from this community is apparent, and what the impact of that lack of representation. I understand that the Maori, the City Council has a number of mechanisms to engage with all communities, and has particular methods to engage with the Maori community, and a particular emphasis to engage with the Maori community. So it's unclear as to why council representation is required, particularly given the sort of issues that you deal with, transport, water and such like, is not necessarily, affects everybody as opposed to one particular community in particular. I'd also note that the last review, representation review, didn't outline any particular problems, and the survey of residents at the time said that the residents were generally happy with the current arrangements. So again, there's no particular, what has changed, or what is the reason for this. I'm also concerned about the issue of fair representation. This ward will have a much smaller number of representatives than a normal than a normal ward. At 0.61, in fact, Wellington City would have the fourth worst, it's the fourth lowest portion. At the last representation, you adjusted things when things were out by, I think, about 15%. You adjusted ward boundaries to make them come within 10% as required by the local Electoral Act. You can have a ward which is out by about 45%, by over 40%. And I don't think that's also not very good. And lastly, in terms of the proposal on the significant decision, it seems that the recommended approach is just to consult with the Maori community, as all Wellingtonians aren't affected by this. I'm here as a non-Maori from the general ward to say I'm affected by this decision. I claim to be affected by this decision. It affects my representation as well. And so I would like to be involved. I'd like the opportunity to be consulted. All Wellingtonians must be involved. You should do a survey. I mean, in the proposal, it's very closed door, some meetings with a small community. Lastly, I also want to note, it's not even evidence that the Maori community is a single community of interest. Half of Maori choose to be on the general roll, not on the Maori roll. And so when you consult with the Maori community, you're consulting with a community where half of them needing to express their view through a Maori constituency. Also, there's not enough information really about what this proposal really is for and what it's going to address and will it fix the issue. So I think it's a significant decision that's not really just for councillors to make. I think it affects the whole city, and I think that all residents must be consulted on the proposal should you choose to go ahead with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. We've got a few questions. First one from Councillor Pennant.
Kia ora, Tony. Thanks for coming in. I'm just wondering if you could explain how you're affected by this proposal, because no one's suggesting any loss of representation, as I understand it. And also, do you recognise that the treaty has some role in local government so that Māori are not just a community of interest, but actually are a treaty partner?
Well, so certainly, to take the second part first, yes, I do recognise that, and I support that. I just don't quite see, and I think that's reflected in the City Council's approach today, that they have special access rights and special rights to be consulted on a number of things, and I think the City Council does a lot of work to do that. You've got whole sections that are devoted to that, and it's good. I'm not saying that's bad. The issue of why representation is, in terms of the effect, well, the effect is that we're going to have another councillor around the table that's going to represent a community which affects the balance of how my councillors are able to influence things. The Maori community, as I pointed out, half of them are on the general roll. I mean, the Maori community, do they see themselves as the Maori community in Wellington, or do they see themselves as Wellingtonians who want to have a say in amongst all the other residents? I feel that having this separation, and especially having this councillor, which will represent a very much smaller proportion. I mean, I'd be much happier if the fair representation issue wasn't on the table, and that that a councillor will be represented by the same number of councillors as the rest of you. But that's not the situation.
Kia ora, Tony. Thank you for coming in to share your thoughts with us today. Appreciate you taking the time. Now I'd like to welcome Kenny Jean Sidwell. No mai haere mai. Thank you for coming in today, Kenny. Kenny's going to speak on item 2.2, which is the Māori Ward Notice of Motion. So Kenny, you've got 5 minutes as well, and if the questions fit within that time. So thank you.
And I just wanted to acknowledge representation of Wellington. I just want to acknowledge that. I'm inspired by a song that I heard the other day, The Sound of Silence, by a gentleman that goes under the name Disturbed. You may or may not know it. The Sound of Silence. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. People talking without speaking, and people hearing without listening. And no one dared disturb that sound of silence. I'm tangata whenua. We hold mana whenua status here in Wellington. Tangata, the people silenced. Whenua, gone. Mana whenua, the mana has gone. The whenua has gone. We've been relegated to decorating your city streets and developers' assets as a way for us to find ourselves and our place in the city. We are just stickers on a lapel that says, I support mana whenua. But you're not hearing the people. You're only engaging in commercial asset growing ventures. There's nowhere for us to put our feet in the earth and feel that we are of here anymore if those, like some here, would have their way. 109 days at Marukaikuru, we have borne witness to Wellington-wide daily coming with nowhere to go for their voice, and we've put our tools down to soothe, to hear, to listen, to stand by. This is not an iwi issue. We have soothed Wellington-wide on the daily. And it's heartbreaking to hear the pain of everyone. We've put our own on the floor to look after Wellington-wide's pain in what's happened at Marukaikuru, at Shelley Bay, 109 days today. Our doors have always been open. These days we don't have a door. You know where we are. You're welcome. You're welcome. I see you. We invite a mana enhancing conversation despite the fact that we stand with our fists held high and a wobbly bottom lip against this and other bodies intent on diminishing us. I don't know if it was a standard request for everybody here today to please be nice and behave yourself. Andrew and I have stood in this room a number of times. I don't believe there was ever a time we've stood in your company and not behaved. Pegged down, silenced, the sound of silence. Awkward one, isn't it? Komatu.
Kia ora, Kenny Jean. Kia ora, Kenny and Anaru. Thank you for coming and sharing your whakaaro with us. We have heard you and we are listening, and we hope that we can find a way through together. And thank you.
Where our door,
Kia ora.
if we had one, is.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi kia koroa. All right, I'd like to now invite Michael Gibson. I don't know if I've seen Michael in the audience. He is right there, right in the front. Came in later. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for coming in. You know how it works. Got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I asked to table my OI request for the costs of what's involved on the agenda item 2.2. I think that you're doing this at a time when you're 3 years short of a scheduled representation review, represents a shocking extra expenditure to ratepayers when you are already proposing a ghastly increase on people with fixed incomes around the city. You might well call it a nice to have. I wouldn't disagree that it's a nice to have. However, going for it right now, and obviously the people who proposed it hadn't a clue that it involved all the kerfuffle and expense that is described in this excellent report on agenda item 2.2. Can I table this, please? You should simply delay the thing until the scheduled representation review in 3 years' time. Apart from anything else, we've just seen with only 3 of you raising your hands on a matter concerned with Shelley Bay, how little you really care for ordinary Māori. You all voted, and the last time I spoke here, I castigated councillors, I'm sorry about that, for voting for Shelley Bay regardless of the climate change aspects of the thing. I now complain that you talked about doing it for Māori. I was here when you voted for it. You did it for Māori, you said. Well, you're talking about the knobs who are close to Ian Cassell's and who have made special personal arrangements, or might have, with him that you know nothing about, and not for Māori such as those you have just heard speaking and who are occupying Shelley Bay. So that doing it for Māori is absolute specious nonsense, just as adding the cost of this agenda item 2.2 GAF to our exorbitant rate increase right now is a total shame. Thank you. Any questions?
Councillor Pennant.
Thanks, Michael, for coming in. Can I just ask, do you accept the many findings of the Waitangi Tribunal that there was colonisation and multiple breaches of the treaty, and that this is essentially a way of making sure that we honour that treaty, which we signed?
No.
Kia ora. Well, thank you, Michael, for coming in to speak with us today. We appreciate you taking the time. All right, I think what we'll do now, rather than start and go for 10 minutes, we'll have morning tea now, and then we'll come back at 25 to 11.
So John Mewson didn't arrive?
John Kettle, yes.
There's another John
John McCuson. No, he
okay,
decided he wasn't going to come. So yes, we've finished public participation now. So we'll come back at 25 to 11. Pass over to Mayor Foster to introduce the Mayoral Taskforce on Three Waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to be relatively brief on this because, in a sense, this is officers' report back on something that's already been reported to you at the end of December. So we've already received the report of the Mayoral Taskforce then, and this is simply officers going through it and saying, whether they accept or otherwise, and pleasingly and not entirely surprisingly, given that officers were involved in the task force, they've gone, yep, accept, this one belongs to GW, etc. There's that kind of thing. So I really just wanted to take us back to where this came from, just briefly, because the background obviously was a number of very high-profile pipe failures. We all acknowledge we have an ageing network, and that we need to invest in that network, and that possibly that network's also been earthquake damaged. In fact, quite probably that network's been earthquake damaged over the last few years by the Kaikoura earthquake in particular, possibly the Seddon earthquakes, but particularly the Kaikoura earthquakes. What was also clear in the task force's report is that we don't adequately know the state of some of our assets. Now, the pleasing thing is that we already have work underway. Some of that work we started straight away at the same time as we got the task force underway, or during the time the task force was operating, particularly around condition assessment. We put extra money into that. The money that we got from government, a lot of that went into that as well, as part of the first stage of the reform process. And we've also, if you look at the recommendations, the recommendations 1, 2 and 4, recommendation 1 is about inspection and condition assessment. That's underway, and looking forward to getting that report back on that. Increased renewals, that's already, that's a core part of the LTP that we have been discussing and which we'll be consulting on. So we are, for the first time ever, fully funding the renewals, not just depreciation, but the renewals. And we know that one of the task force's findings was that renewals were well below the level of depreciation. In other words, depreciation was being used to do other things other than renewing the pipes, some of which was in the water space, I should make sure I add. And then there's a recommendation also about ring fencing. Now, we had a discussion yesterday at Finance, Audit and Risk about the concept of ring fencing as part of the annual report. And while that's difficult to do in terms of the way in which the finances are structured, is certainly able to be presented quite clearly, and we can put that into the annual report. So there was some work to be done to present that, because I think that gives us some comfort. We'd always taken comfort as councillors that we were fully depreciating. Look, we're fully depreciating. That's fantastic. It's fantastic, except for not all the money was going to the pipe renewal. And I think that's the thing that we need some surety going forward. And I think once we go down the track, assuming that the government reforms go ahead, then clearly it is going to be ring-fenced, because it's going to be an entity of its own. There are some amendments which I've been asked to move, and which I do want to move. The first one of those is that the report back will be let's check that they're all up there. The report back will be in October rather than March. The reason for that is we want to make sure that the advice comes back to Council in time for any funding decisions or consultation decisions that need to be made for next year's budget conversation. And then there are a whole series which are around water metering. And I think probably, while the task force was very, very clear that water meters are an essential management tool, they're essential to understanding where there are breaks in the pipe network, and to being able to identify those and to be able to address them. They're also essential to behaviour change. And really, it's not a case that water metering is not a case of whether of imposing extra cost. It's actually about avoiding cost, because we know that as our population is growing, that is driving increased water demand, which is no surprise at all. And the time is coming now when we are going to need an augmented supply system, or we're going to need to reduce the use of water. And we also had yesterday some very clear advice that reducing the amount of water is also good for the environment. Because you're taking less out of the river systems, you're investing less in chemicals and power to move water around, and you're also investing less in literally the concrete infrastructure of extra dams, or even worse, actually damming rivers. So there are a lot of reasons to go down that track, and I think you can probably pretty much put a ring around that when the government reforms proceed, that water metering will need to be part of that, because obviously any new entity will need to be able to raise the money that it needs to manage the water system. Nevertheless, these recommendations are all about effectively reflecting and reinforcing what the task force said, which was we understood that this is a sensitive matter, and that we need to make sure that whatever system that is designed, while that system is still within our control, is designed in a way which is sensitive to people's ability to afford the essentials of life, which obviously includes being able to afford water. So that is what those recommendations are all about. And then there's also one there which also talks about working with the other councils around the region on water meters, because we are part of a bulk water system, and that's supplied by Greater Wellington to the 4 cities. If for example, some of the cities went down the water metering track, what you would see is that their proportion of the water bill would inevitably fall significantly, and those which were not on water meters would rise significantly. So that will go straight onto our rates bills. So I think I will leave it there, and I think Councillor Rush is going to second. And I just wanted again to reflect my appreciation of Councillors Rush and Condi and all the officers and all the task force members for the work that's been done. Great to see the officers report on that here, and look forward to your endorsement.
Councillor Rush.
Thanks, I'll second, but I'll hold my right to speak.
Would someone else like to speak on this? Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I just want to join with the Mayor in thanking the members of the task force, particularly as the Paikawakawa Southern Ward Councillor Eugene Doyle, who I know played a critical role in that and is still absolutely committed to continuing to be involved in the work of this. And I know that the Mayor is enthusiastic about that, but you might like to note that in your right of reply, Mayor Foster. I also want to just say that for me, the experience of dealing with the failures in our water infrastructure and then reading the task force's report really brought home to me the importance of our role as governors in asking sometimes uncomfortable questions about the advice we receive, because it's clear that over the last 15 to 20 years at least, this table was given constant reassurances and information which would not have withstood scrutiny. And had people asked those difficult questions at that time, we may well have not ended up in the situation that we're in. And I'm not saying that that's absolutely the case, but it's clear from reading the Mayoral Task Force that there has been major failures in the protection of our water infrastructure in the past. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we respectfully ask and scrutinise the advice that we receive, and I won't be shying away from doing that, particularly in this space, because that is a lesson for me from the Mayoral Task Force into water. And I guess just on that note, I just want to note my scepticism about water metering, particularly the way it's described in this report as being an inevitable development, and also the moves in here to communicate the benefits of switching from a water charging model to a method based on actual water consumption to reduce demand. And I want to pick up on the comments the Mayor made that there are a number of breaks in our network. We know that there are significant leaks in our network at present, but we can't even keep up with the demand to fix them, let alone go through a massive process and a huge amount of capital injection to have water meters installed in homes around Wellington. So I say we start with the water network and the leaks we know about and fix them, and then it may well be that we end up in a different conversation around residential water metering. But for me, that conversation is premature. I've got a number of concerns about the impact on low-income people, on renters, and that there hasn't been a proper independent distributional analysis of the impact of water metering, particularly on the most vulnerable in Wellington. So I don't support the kind of communicating the benefits or that they're inevitable. I think that we should be very sceptical about water meters. They're hugely expensive to install, and they don't overnight save any water. Whereas we know in the public network there are significant leaks all over the network, and we can't even keep up the demand for fixing them. We can't even address. So I'm, for one, very sceptical about the future, the role of water metering, and I don't think that I think this council needs to tread very carefully in the process that we go through with the community. And I really welcome the amendments in this in Councillor Pennett's leadership in removing discussion water can you go down, sorry? Water meters from the long-term plan, and also that we will do proper independent analysis about water charging systems to make sure that it's transparent to all users and fair and reasonable, because I do not support the production of a business case from Wellington Water which tells one side of the story without proper analysis on our most vulnerable people. So I really welcome this more considered and stepped approach to the introduction of water meters, and don't accept the advice that sort of they're inevitable and the job is to communicate the benefits.
Councillor Foon.
Kia ora tātou, and also I want to thank everyone who worked on the task force and brought the report to us, and also to thank the officers for going through this and working through their recommendations and what they accept and note. I need to say that while I'm absolutely happy with the accepts, I am not overly happy with the notes and the in principle. I just think that it is... I understand that it's council speak, but we have an opportunity to take the bull by the horns and really show some leadership around how we are managing our water, how we look at, I don't want to call it a resource, it's intricate to our life, and how we go forward with that as a community. So what Wellington has gone through is serious. Our reputation has been seriously damaged. The health risks are real, and the risks for the future are real if we don't seize the opportunity with the district plan to require stormwater infrastructure, and more importantly, green infrastructure, to stop flooding through our urban areas. So I thank officers for promising that they will make sure that the recommendations are part of the district plan. But also, I just want to read out the section that I'm most concerned with is the community participation. So opening on the report, this paragraph says, reconnecting communities with their water is a critical element of embracing Te Mana o Te Wai. It is increasingly evident that the way communities use and interact with the water and water services has a major impact on the investment that is required to deliver them. And I'm just concerned that by not committing to the communications, so specifically from 42 to 48, and thank you, Councillor Condi, for bringing these amendments. But actually, when we have clear breakups with council and community, is actually just over communication. When they're not clear on what's going on, when they're not clear if they can or cannot swim in the ocean. And so specifically, we're talking to 44, where Auckland has Swim Safe, which is a brand or a way of communicating to the public so that they know when it is safe to swim or not. Water, and number 46, Water That Counts. It's an opportunity, community-led, SME-led, to bring a digital system to capitalise on sharing information with our community. And just also clear lines of investigate ways to connect people with their catchment in number 42. My experience as a Wellingtonian, I didn't know that there were waterways flowing through Newtown. If I don't know that they're there, how can I treat my water well? And by understanding that and sharing that with my community, we understand and we are working on this together. And that's where council saves money. So I think, Councillor Condi, I won't be bringing my amendment to reconvene the Water Task Force, but I hear Councillor Rush may have a solution that we can work. I think we need to bring community along with us on this one, and I am committed to making sure that we do that. So yes, so thank you, and thank you for the recommendations, Councillor Condi.
Would anyone else like to speak? Deputy Mayor Free.
Look, I'll just speak really quickly. I think we've all had a strong message from our communities, from Wellington generally, how important our water infrastructure actually is, and it's something that we have had maybe a bit of a tendency to take for granted. I don't think any of us are going to take it for granted in the next few years, and we hope that those lessons actually stay front of mind, that this infrastructure is really crucial for the health and well-being of all of our residents. It's probably one of the most important things we can do. I do acknowledge and thank those who've been involved in bringing this report to us. I think most of the recommendations are really sound. I'm particularly keen for us to get on and fix the cross-connection problem. That's letting sewage inadvertently flow in some of our waterways. It's simply not good enough, and we really need to make sure that's pursued and fixed. I'm a bit ambivalent about water meters. I'm glad that we are not making that decision now, and I think we do need more information, and we do need a really robust discussion with our community, because in the past we have thought that in fact they were quite expensive and the billing is quite a cost, and there are other ways of achieving those efficiencies through public education and motivating people to do better. I still think that could be the case, but I've got an open mind. The one thing that I did want to make sure, and I believe that Councillor Condi and the Mayor have put an amendment in or done something to make it more clear, is that when it comes to the proposed water reforms, all of our discussions have been about the assets remaining in private ownership. The recommendation 33 didn't make that quite clear enough for me, and it needs to be read with an earlier recommendation. So perhaps in your right of reply, you can just reassure me as to how you've taken that concern on board to make sure it's really clear. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, and I will be supporting these recommendations. I think everyone's been through a big learning curve in the last year or two around water, and which is great, which is going to help us make better decisions together. And I think that's the key, is making the better decisions together. We are one territorial council in a region that that is all brought into Wellington Water. Wellington Water is part of us essentially, so we can't keep throwing brickbats at them all the time, because we're in this together. And so the only way we're going to move forward is that if we're all working better together. So I just want to make that point. And we need to do it in a respectful way and a professional way as well. So, to get the solutions that we need, when we come to have a conversation about water metering, we need to get all the facts on the table, and knowing that in a lot of other areas around New Zealand, they've been put in, and the outcomes that have been they've achieved that in lower usage, and there's also been mechanisms in place to support those that may be on low incomes and may be impacted by water metering. And so, look, I think this is a leadership issue here as well. So we as governors have got to take responsibility as well. And it's not just about questioning, but it's actually being responsible and working together. So I will be supporting these recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Rush.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So I think the timing of the Mayoral Taskforce, although was sort of pushed on us, was excellent, because it gave us an opportunity to review what we have historically done based on Roman principles of engineering and sewage, and enabled us to have a reflect on whether that's where we need to be going, particularly here in New Zealand, where Tau Māori is becoming a much more important part of our community, but also recognising that the principles of water-sensitive urban design can actually facilitate a much better outcome for both community and for the why, going forward. So I think we also had to look also that we recognise our population is growing, and that the old ways of relying on a supply of water that was always going to be there would not be good enough. Scarcity would inevitably come, water will become precious, and that will lead, I think, inevitably to meters, but I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. What I would like to emphasise in addition to Councillor Foon's comments, is the willingness of our community to get involved and take ownership. It's been an extremely pleasant experience, particularly working with the likes of Eugene Doyle and others, but just seeing how the community want to rally around, they just want some leadership. And as a consequence, I am a bit uncomfortable that we fob some of this stuff off to Greater Wellington. I think in a legal sense that some of those measures around monitoring and quality are indeed their responsibility, but we are the community reps. And when something goes wrong, it's us they ring. And, it's the same with the buses, of course. So I've always said that the buck really stops with the Wellington City Council as a first stop anyway. And so I do think that there is space in there for us to work closely with Greater Wellington. I think they will welcome that. I do think that there is a little bit of an emphasis on the government reforms, and it did become clear that during the task force that these were going to overtake some of the things that were already on the table. But nevertheless, we felt it worthwhile to reinforce what those reforms can bring. But we shouldn't take them as a fait accompli. Government reforms of this magnitude are often delayed, problems arise, and so I think we should be very wary about simply saying that this will be subsumed by government reforms. Nevertheless, they are coming. One of the things that I did pick up on was the need to champion this as the portfolio lead going forward. What this is both told us, but also provided a robust framework along with our long-term plan, is the funding and mechanisms and the knowledge to start doing the right thing. And that's an operational matter, but it's one that we need as governors, and me in the lead of that, to really reinforce to our officers and to our partners at Wellington Water. The state of our understanding of the network is absolutely woeful. It's embarrassing. Not to reflect poorly on officers or Wellington Water, but it's just the way it is. I think that's just the way we've treated water. I've mentioned before, this would never pass muster in an oil and gas company with pipelines that are of similar size and magnitude. So we need to do better. I commit to you to make sure and to lead that. I also commit to follow up with those members of the task force that are interested periodically, at least within 6 months, to give them a report on where we're going and how we're tracking, and for us to share a coffee and a korero around what else we could be doing. So I commit that to you, Councillor Foon. Councillor Fitzsimons, I agree that metering can be controversial. It doesn't need to be. You mentioned that we need to take care of our, most vulnerable. This is the wealthiest city in New Zealand, and yet the Kapiti Coast, Christchurch, South Wairarapa, Auckland. I think we had water meters in Hawke's Bay when I grew up as a kid. They've all managed to do it. So I think it is right, and I supported taking it out of the long-term plan to consult on separately. I think that there is indeed a need for us to get good information around these things, but I can tell you I've got elderly residents in Roseneath who've got water meters because it reduces their rates, and they will carry their dishwashing water out into the garden because they know the value of it, and these people live in very wealthy houses. Bless those elderly folks, they certainly are very Presbyterian in their approach, and maybe we need to learn something. So anyway, I'm very pleased, but as I say, I think that this has only highlighted the challenge that's in front of us, and I I accept that challenge as your portfolio lead. I recognise it's a difficult one. Yes, there are going to be difficult questions, and I will ask them, Councillor Fitzsimons, but I will ask them in the appropriate way, in the appropriate forum.
Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Young.
Kia ora, councillors. I just wanted to briefly speak to this report and touch on a couple of other points that have been made here today. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Councillors Condi, Councillors Rush and Mayor Andy Foster, as well as community representatives Eugene Doyle and other councillors who have had a great interest in this task force. Something that is really clear within the report is that it has shown a close to critical failure of our water systems and a historic underinvestment in the area, and that is why I'm also really proud, in conjunction with the long-term plan that we were looking at last week, that we passed amendments for record investments in green infrastructure, for more sustainable ways of managing water, and for choosing not to have the discussion about water metering in our long-term plan, because I, like other councillors, agree that there is an appropriate time and place. We've heard over the last few days about some of the key environmental impacts, and I'm just going to repeat some words that were said on Tuesday. Understanding the full and proper impact of water not being a finite resource is something that this generation and our generation of leaders is going to have to come to understand. And we looked at the environmental impact, the carbon impact, and how this affects our biodiversity and our streams. So a time comes when we need to build another lake, tap into another aquifer, or take more and more leaders out of the Hutt River, and then eventually we might not have enough left to support our very own ecosystems that we live and thrive by. Every drop of water, down to the last milligram, the glasses on this table, is a really valuable resource, and we then create more emissions when we treat it and add more chemicals. And as we've seen with the woes of Wellington water in the last year to couple of years, that our communities have been really strongly impacted by this as well. I wanted to touch on the role of water metering, and I understand that this is a really difficult conversation to have with people, but even just as soon as last night, I was at a meeting with a lot of other really strong Pacifica leaders, and there was an expression that members of the community were fearful, or members of the community were worried about a community-wide impact and the disproportionate effects that this will have on low-income Wellingtonians, on renters. And I note, Councillor Rush, that other councils like Kapiti Council have installed water meters, but let's not pretend that it's been rosy the whole time through. And we also have a duty as a city that is the capital to try and be forward thinking. And we've had, and we will have more discussions at today's SPC about how we empower communities and make sure we take care of those who aren't represented at this table. And I wanted to note and bring the note from the Pacifica leaders last night. Lastly, I would like to touch on some really cool, exciting things that I've seen in the report. So I'm really happy to we can bog on and talk about the issues and the crisis, but if people don't come up with solutions, then we're just really going around in circles. So I wanted to talk about, there are several recommendations I'm really excited about, and it's the daylighting streams, the green infrastructure. I'd like to talk a little bit about how awesome it was to see such extensive engagement with mana whenua and the water rights issue. And then lastly, just to look at the community impact. We had poo trucks coming all through my community down here in Kilburnie, just on the same block, as I'm sure, and I've also heard from residents of Fiddle Bay and Island Bay as well, and to recognise that, for a period, and Sarah Free came and visited some of the residents with me as well, recognising the impact of not being able to open your windows for 6 months while we're in a pandemic is a little bit uncomfortable. And then lastly, just to close off my speaking points with agreeing with some of the key recommendations that we need as leaders to demand a higher standard for our residents, and we can't pass the buck between central and local government, but all have been called to recognise that this isn't a finite resource, and look a little bit in-house to show that sometimes the regulators have failed in this area, and we need to take responsibility as an authority that regulates this kind of resource too. So that's looking at our own in-house things, whether that be trying to save a bit of money and not treating our resource with how valuable it actually is, or other future decisions coming up to that degree. Thank you, I'll leave it.
Councillor Conde, I've just seen your email come through. So you'd like to speak and probably explain that, your email to councillors, because they may not have seen it. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to start by saying, that Councillor Rush, you may have blazed the trail, hopefully. I think as we move into an area of, an era of decarbonisation, that, many people who have worked in oil and gas can now see that their skills will be transferable into the water space and pipelines. It looks like we're going to have plenty of work for them. That's something that we will definitely be needing to beef up our workforce in the water space. And if anything, the Taskforce report is very clear about how much mahi we have ahead of us. I do want to talk about the water metering and volumetric charging, and just talk about we've actually tried to separate those two things quite clearly in the recommendations, because it's my understanding that we can put water meters into people's homes and not use them for the purpose of charging. And it is my understanding that is what happens in Christchurch, that they do have universal water meters, but they don't use them for charging. They use them purely for leak detection and to give consumers information about how much water they're using. Which then comes back to some of the points about education and trying to encourage people to change their behaviour. Greater Wellington has funded Wellington Water to do a business case this previous year looking at water metering, and they specifically were looking at the benefits just around leak detection and consumer information if we didn't use them for charging. And that business case found that water meters do essentially wash their face if they're just being used for those purposes without connecting to the volumetric charging. And so Wellington Water is funded in the next financial year, so starting in July, to follow up on that business case with an investigation of the preferred option that came out of the first business case, looking at universal smart meters. And again, the focus of that business case is specifically on the benefits of water meters for leak detection and consumer information. They will be also looking at what the additional potential benefits would be if we added charging onto that, but charging is not the main thrust of those business cases, and it hasn't been since Greater Wellington commissioned them. And I think it was really important for us to draw that distinction because Greater Wellington have had this work in train for a while, and I think they were very clear that they wanted to talk about water meters without talking about volumetric charging. And since we're kind of in this together as a partnership, I think we need to respect that they've got that train of work in happening, and that if we want to talk about volumetric charging, that is a separate issue. And again, that the members of the Taskforce were very clear about their concerns about equity, and that the recommendations that we have in front of us today acknowledge that and basically take the wording straight out of the Taskforce's recommendation to say that we won't consult on volumetric charging until we've satisfied ourselves on the equity concerns that were raised by the Taskforce. And kia ora, Councillor Matthews, that we managed to get the word renters in there now, because that was my number one regret and oversight. I'm very proud of that piece of work, the Taskforce report, but that word was missing and is now where it should be. So I think that's a really important thing as we go forward. We know we included the Kapiti case in the Taskforce report to kind of illustrate ways that you can look at the equity issues and the way that they tackled them. And these recommendations are asking our officers to go away and have a look at how other charging systems around the country have looked at that equity issue, which I think is great. I wanted to talk about probing questions. Councillor Fitzsimons, I think it's really great, and I think one of the things I wanted to emphasise is sometimes probing questions are stupid questions, and I really, having spent some of my career as a teacher at university, they try to encourage people to say that there is no such thing as a stupid question, and the stupid question that I asked that got me kind of onto this journey before the Taskforce was ever convened was when we had our first meeting about the annual plan budget with Annie Matthews, and we were talking about we'd revalued the assets and therefore our depreciation had to go up and we had to collect more rates to fund that depreciation. And afterwards I went up to him and I said, that's cool, I get all of that, but what do we spend the depreciation on when we collect it? And that, kind of a stupid question, like I felt a bit silly asking it, but that was the question, right? What do we do with it once we collect it? And his answer was we use it to pay down debt. And I kind of filed that away. I didn't immediately go, oh, there's a problem here. I kind of went, that's interesting. I filed it away to kind of worry away at that over time. But as we ended up in the task force, it became really clear that that stupid question was a really important question that we didn't have a good handle on. And I just, I think there's lots of mahi that's come out of this report. There's going to be a lot of work in the pipes that Councillor Rush is doing, but one of the things that I've kind of got, that I've taken under my wing is the lessons that we've learned around the financing and asset management planning. And I'm constantly bringing these things up in our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meetings and all of that, is I want to take the lessons that we've taken out of this water task force and take them out of water and into all the rest of our assets and our asset management and make sure that we're learning those lessons and transferring them so that we see things like, so around the issue around ring fencing of our depreciation, that our finance and infrastructure strategy now shows that debt headroom that we need to maintain to fund renewals that are coming in the future. So in the past we never were able to, that wasn't visible to councillors, and so there was kind of a sense that they could just spend it. And so things like that, making sure that those things are coming through in other parts of the report, I think are really important, so that we transfer those lessons not just into our asset management planning for water, but across the board for transport, for our own properties, for park, sport and rec, whatever way that they need to be transferred. One of the things I discovered as you come into the water space on the task force is that there are a lot of overlapping responsibilities, and it is very complicated, and I think that's, Councillor Foon, one of the things we see when we get this kind of accept and note and how are we going to work with Greater Wellington. And I think it is really important that we acknowledge that for a number of these recommendations, Greater Wellington are the lead agency, and we need to acknowledge their leadership and authority on that, and say that we are here to help. And we want to get on and work with them as much as we can to make progress on this, but respecting that we each have our different roles to play there. We've got a lot of work coming up in the district plan, and I know that Councillor Rush has been already doing a lot of work there to make sure that we seize the opportunity where we're reviewing the district plan to integrate a lot of things that can make a difference for us in the water space. The other thing I wanted to discuss was this, the number of the recommendations, we are accepting them in principle, and in most cases where we've said accept in principle, it's because the funding implications of the full recommendation aren't yet known. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be really clear with our community is we've put a lot more money in this long-term plan into water, a lot more into both operating and capital, and there will be more. We haven't put in enough to do the whole job. And a lot of what we've funded for the next 3 years is actually getting more information so that we can build a roadmap to what it will cost to do the whole job, and to implement the full recommendations of the task force to make sure that we are complying with the National Policy Statement on Fresh Water. These are huge changes and they are going to be expensive, and so I think it's important that we know it, and we communicate to our community that while we've increased funding a lot, and I think we've covered our bases in terms of taking on the immediate concerns that we need to, that in 3 years' time there will be more money that needs to be spent here. There will be another step change in funding that will be needed as we understand the problems and their solutions much more clearly, and we understand how much those solutions are going to cost. And so that's one of the reasons where there are some of these that are accept in principle. Many of them we have started work on them already. There is funding happening, there is work happening in that, but we know that there will be more money needed. There will be more work that needs to be done to be able to, before we can tick that box. The other kind of stream of work that I think comes out of this is around the issues around community and transparency. And I think those two words, when I was working on the task force report, we started thinking about what were the principles that we all agreed on after all of these conversations. And I think those were the first two that kind of came out, that everybody was like, yeah, we definitely, from all these conversations, community have to be involved, they have to be taken on this journey with us, and we have to behave in a transparent way for that to be possible. Because if the communities can't get the information, if communities don't know what's going on, then they can't help, and they can't hold us to account. So community and transparency came out really strongly from the task force. And those are probably some of the more challenging recommendations for us to address, because they're more about culture than they are about pipes. They're not engineering things. I think that's kind of where Councillor Foon was getting at some of these things. Some of them are about branding, they're about communication, they're about the culture that we have in our city about how we talk about water. And those can be really challenging, but I think they are equally important as the pipes, because if we don't get the culture right, then in 3 years' time, when we come to the community and say, look, here's the next bill for what needs doing, they're not going to be on board with us. Yep. So that work has to all happen together. And finally, I guess I'll come back to the specific recommendations that were added, but just to say that I'm really proud of this piece of work. I think the task force did a really great job of identifying what the problems were and putting us on the right path for the solutions. But this is pretty much the end of the beginning. There is a lot more work here. We're going to be, as councillors and governors, we're going to have our eyes on this for a long time to come. The first status report we're going to get will be in 6 months, but we will be getting lots of those for a lot longer before we're going to be able to say we've ticked all of these boxes. So there's lots of work still to come. Just to quickly note that a couple of late additions that people might not have caught up with. So recommendation 10 there is addressing a point that Deputy Mayor Free raised. Recommendation 33 of the Mayoral Taskforce report is one about if the reforms don't go ahead, or if stormwater is not included in the reforms, that we'll look about how we deal with that with other councils in the region. But that one didn't specifically mention the non-profit public ownership elements. So we wanted to just make it really clear that it had to be read in conjunction with recommendation 30, which does identify public ownership and non-profit as being part of that. And there was another late addition that I can't even remember which one was the late addition. Ring fencing, thank you. Everyone's probably read it now. So we've talked I've spoken to the ring fencing one anyway about exactly what it is. It is something that would be incredibly difficult for us. The reason it would be incredibly difficult for us to do is because our entire finance system is set up to manage debt as a portfolio. Our entire finance system is set up to manage all of these things in that way. We would basically have to unpick right down to our bank accounts almost to try and implement the ring fencing. So given that the water reforms are on the horizon, if water reforms don't happen, then we may need to go back and that might be worth doing. But for the moment, the focus is really on just making sure that it's visible rather than making sure it's actually explicitly ring fenced. Kia ora.
Councillor Paul. And then Councillor Pennant. Thank you.
Yes, that's right, 2 in a row. I wasn't going to speak, but our hero, Seenarash, Councillor Seenarash, you had some interesting points in your kōrero which I really wanted to respond to. But I wanted to start by thanking officers and for our colleagues for all of your mahi on this really important piece of work. For me, water is the most important thing, and I say this currently as my own iwi Ngāti Awa goes through the High Court challenging a resource consent to extract billions of litres of water from one of our most tapu water sources, and as a descendant of Waikato Tainui who were ridiculed for our views of our tupuna awa, the Waikato River, for many decades before people realised that when we have the ability to look after our tupuna, we are able to look after it properly. And we've seen the fruits of that, I guess, management of that resource over the last few decades. But I I did want to respond to some of the little philosophical, ideological gems that you had in your kōrero. They were buried quite deep in there, particularly the one around the kind of supremacy of the Roman system that we currently operate under for the delivery of our three waters. And I actually reject that assertion because it's failing. And
can I just make a point of order?
Sure, yeah.
Councillor, I mean, I actually totally agree with you. I said it's all been based on Roman stuff, and now we're actually looking to change. So,
of order.
She's just got it a little bit wrong.
Okay, well, let's keep moving. We kind of need to keep.
Anyway, on that basis, I agree with you. And actually, these inherited Western ways of doing things, maybe we're starting to realise now how much of a failure they actually are. And I'm glad that the waka is being clearly steered in the right direction again, thanks to central government direction around Te Mana o Te Wai under the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. And I'm glad to see that we're taking seriously the contributions that our waterways give to us in our everyday life, not just in the sense of for hygiene and for drinking water and keeping us replenished, but also considering the cultural and spiritual properties of waterways. I also just wanted to talk briefly about a really awesome development in the Living Pa, which will be developed up at Victoria University. And this will be the first living building in any city in New Zealand, which will fully incorporate mātauranga Māori and water-sensitive kind of design into the building. So that building will collect rainwater and stormwater from outside of the building and use that for flushing the toilets and all of those kind of water uses that don't actually require drinking water, because I think it's ridiculous that in 2021 we're using potable water to flush down our toilet. And I just wanted to say that that's one of many examples of mātauranga Māori or Māori approaches or Indigenous approaches to living with and caring for our waterways. And I just wanted to also acknowledge the Taupo local authority, who has actually transferred the powers of managing the three waters over to the local iwi Ngāti Tūwharetoa under Section 33 of the RMA. And I think that that's a really interesting development, in that we should consider how beneficial it has been to have iwi steering these projects of work under the Whaitua Committee and also under this Mayoral Taskforce as well, helping to steer that waka, and that we should consider how we can make sure that they are fully resourced and supported to continue with that leadership. And I also wanted to acknowledge the numerous waterways in the central city which now are underground, that we are only just rediscovering their names and their deep histories and traditional uses, and hope that one day we can daylight those streams again, and that they can be acknowledged and that their mana can fully be honoured once again. And yeah, and the other thing was, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Condi about the water meters, and that yes, in theory I totally agree, and in theory I do support water meters, but I think the reality is that the community have a lot of distrust towards us at the moment, and that's going to take a long time to rebuild. So I was really keen on them, but now after hearing the concerns from the community and from Councillor Fitzsimons and some of those champions, I think we really need to just take a step back, address the major issues, the major leaks, and then look at how we can continue to preserve water and appreciate it in our everyday lives. And I also think that there's a lot of misinformation out there, so I think there needs to be a targeted kind of communications plan to debunk some of the myths out there around water meters. So yeah, thanks for listening to my kōrero.
Kia ora, Councillor Pennant.
Kia ora, and thank you, Councillor Paul. It's fitting, I think, I can follow you, because actually we always say that we stand on the shoulders of giants when we do our work. No one generation is ever responsible for progressive change, and many people have actually fought over our water. And so, Councillor Calvert, I'd just like to especially acknowledge you for your very constructive speech. Thank you for that, because actually while obviously there are some problems and there's some things for it to learn from, and me particular, this report does not acknowledge some of the good things that were done. So, Councillor Fitzsimons, I can assure you that I was a significant pain in the neck of the chief executive over climate change. Every meeting I would ask him, what are you doing here? And I knew I'd won when I got a report where it mentioned it about 30 times. And they did measure the emissions, actually, which just would have been nice to acknowledge that work was done. That I championed green infrastructure in my case. It got into Te Atakura, so it's good that it's finally coming to fruition. It doesn't and it's not just me. Obviously, there were many, many people before that did some awesome work. One of the best council meetings I've ever been in is when we had a meeting about sludge and the amazing potential of human organic material. And that's incredibly progressive, and some people would find that quite challenging. We talked about how we have destroyed Indigenous water systems. We did do that, and we were obviously the first before this council to get some Māori representation, and we talked about water security. We've also invested huge amounts of time and effort into earthquake resilience, which is a massive, massive threat in the city. There will be big earthquakes, and when they come, the work that we have done will be helpful. So I really think the task force, there's some really good things in there, and I think that will help us go forward. And certainly the stuff around investing in money. If I was at fault, I should have advocated for more spending. But, this was the culture of local government was you keep the rates at 3% and you don't invest. And so that was very hard. So I always say I thought I was doing quite well when we got extra 100 million and it wasn't enough. I just want to finish off by I will be stronger than some of my colleagues. I am strongly opposed to any move towards privatisation of our water. It is our life force. It is what keeps us alive. And whilst I obviously acknowledge the significant environmental benefits of water meters, they are a route to privatisation. And that has already started. You probably missed it, but water futures are being traded on the NASDAQ. This is where it's going. If you are a business person, this is your best business opportunity. And while we might be going for water meters for these very, very good reasons, which I don't in no way argue against, we must retain control of our water, and I will fight. I will die in a ditch on this one. And so I am concerned by some of the recommendations here. It does come with that, we've got to save money, let's get rid of it. Actually, our water assets are critical. But look, I really thank everyone for the constructive debate, and I think that just really helps us move forward for the next generation, so that the generation that follows us will see the good work we've done.
Kia ora. Right, over to Mayor Foster for his right of reply. You don't have to acknowledge every point.
Oh, well, I had no intention of doing that.
Thank you.
Look, there were some themes, though, that I thought it was worth reflecting on. The first one of those is the theme about the state of the asset. Well, first of all, I'd say, look, thank you for the positive feedback about the work of the task force and the acknowledgements of the people who contributed to that. And it was a combined effort. And I'm particularly actually going to add, in terms of the thanks, because Wellington Water's come up in several people's conversation there. Wellington Water were an essential part of that conversation. They worked really, really hard and did a fantastic job and provided us with a lot of great information. So, and I think Councillor Calvert's comment that they are us is true. Wellington Water is an organisation which has been set up by this council and other councils to work collaboratively together, and that's clearly the direction which is being, in a sense, supersized now. But that's what they are. They are us, and they are available to us, and often pick up the phone. In fact, I had to pick up the phone this morning to say, let's have a conversation about something with Wellington Water. So, they are us, and they've worked very, very hard on this. Yes, there are significant breaks in the water system. Yes, there are leaks in the system. Yes, there are probably more than we want them to be. However, we don't quite know what the scale of the water loss is. The range which the task force came up with was something between 6 and 30%. That's a very, very broad range. And obviously I'll touch base on meters later on, but meters are part of the way of trying to identify the level of water loss. There's always been water loss, there always will be. The question is trying to get it down to an optimal level, because you could completely avoid water loss, but doing that would mean you'd be inspecting every pipe every day. You will be, and that's public and private pipes. Every washer, the resource to do that sometimes becomes not worth doing. So it's getting it down to the optimal level, which is sort of around that sort of 10-15% is what I usually understand. And we have provided extra resources already to do that detection, to do that fixing, etc., in both water and wastewater. Stormwater is probably less of an issue in terms of the fixing, but it does come in there as well. And I think Deputy Mayor Free, you also noted that there are cross connections, and that is absolutely an issue too. This is an issue not just in the public network, but the private network as well. And there will be people who will get knocks on the door at some point in time. It's like, hey, you're going to have to fix a pipe which is part of your responsibility. And some of those is because they're not being properly put in the first place. Councillor Foon, you mentioned bringing the community along with us. That was a very strong theme in the Taskforce's work, and as you can see it reflected in the report there. And something we really want to make sure that whatever the reform structure is, actually survives through and is in part of that, because if we end up with something that's a water entity which is from Nelson to Hawke's Bay, the community's involvement in their own local streams and local waterways is going to be really important. And that could get lost in that, so I think it's an important theme. The issue of public ownership, look, that came up with a few of them, I think Deputy Mayor and Councillor Pannett in particular. Look, that's a really strong theme as well. Look, the government said that's important too, and it's probably one of the reasons why I know some local government are sort of thinking, I wonder why we want to be shareholders in some entity which we've got essentially no control over it. But the question will be, if it's not local government, would you give it to government? And I kind of go, yeah, nah, because we've seen what's happened before with privatisations, and so I completely agree with you. In fact, opposing privatisation was one of the reasons that I got involved in politics in the first place. So, that, particularly when it comes to something as essential as water. Councillors O'Neill and Rush, I think you've started reflecting on the finite nature of water, that we only have so much of it, and I think that's what we're starting to do. In fact, I think we're starting recognising more and more that we have a planet that's not growing, and we're putting more and more pressure on it, whether it's on the ecosystems, whether it's on the air itself and what we discharge to that, whether it's the water. All of these things are the same thing. We're starting to price access to air, because we're putting carbon charges on. We're starting to price, sometime it becomes inevitable that if we put more and more pressure on, something has to give. And we're pricing, you enthusiastically say, let's price waste more and more and more. Water, in a sense, while it's something that people have to use, sometimes managing that demand and getting people to understand it's actually a precious resource becomes important. We did do a lot of work on education, I would say probably through the late 90s, early 2000s. That was valuable. We were reducing the level of water loss, and I think it was good, but is that going to be enough? And I think probably the answer is no. We will need to do more than that. And just finally to metering, look, there are a lot of things wrapped around there in terms of safeguards, in terms of the conversation. It is a conversation at some point I think we are going to need to have. That was the Taskforce's very strong view. We did discuss that at great length as well. And I think, Councillor Paul, you said there's a lot of misinformation about water meters, and I would agree with that. And I think the challenge we all have is to try and contribute to good information, not to selective information, but to good information about water meters, and that we look at the ways. We're not going to be the first or the last. Yeah, we're not going to be the first or the last to have gone through this conversation with our communities. Other people have done this. They've had good models there, and I'm sure that we can pick the best of those models for our community as well.
Great. Thank you. Let's vote. And listening to the debate, I don't think we need to take anything separately. People sound like they are in agreement to vote on. Thank you. Let's just. That is carried. Thank you. Right, so we're going to move on to item 2.2, the notice of motion for Māori wards, and I will introduce that now. So e te tā Maori ora kia tātou katoa. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Mayor and the councillors who signed this notice of motion. It was a strong direction of where we want to be heading as a council, and I'd like to thank Councillor Fitzsimons for seconding it and for her support in thinking about how we can approach this. And I'd like to acknowledge our staff who have become overnight gurus in Māori ward and representation. So thank you Karepa, Sean and Jennifer and Stephen and your teams for getting on with this and and helping us understand the issue and how it can be worked through. So I'll just start off by acknowledging that the recommendation that is being put forward is a slight change to the notice of motion, and that's around making sure that we're following good process. But just this morning, as a result of conversations with other councillors, we've added in a little bit more just to talk about noting that all residents can provide feedback to council through usual channels. So we'll have a conversation with staff about whether there can be something on our website people can submit. They know they often email us at group councillors, but there are ways that people can tell us what they think, and we'll feed that into the process. I think that is really important. We know that Māori ward is a matter which directly affects Māori, and so for this reason, that is why targeted engagement with mana whenua and Māori is being recommended, and I support that. And I've explained why we've amended the other part. And I know that there are a variety of opinions out there, and it really shows people the importance of sharing their thoughts with us. There is a lot of support out there, but there are people who are still grappling with these issues, and it's important that we hear from everybody. I'd also like to note that the notice of motion acknowledges the work that councillors are already doing to improve how we work with mana whenua, and that work continues even with the Māori ward proposal here today. Because we know that Māori ward is only one tool, and I'd like to acknowledge that the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta acknowledged that when she was speaking to it. She said Māori ward is one tool, it's not the only tool, and it's definitely not the only tool that local government should be using to engage with Māori and work with Māori over decision making. And I'd like to acknowledge her leadership for her principled stand that she's taken to change this effectively racist law and removing the insurmountable barrier which many councils have grappled with over a number of years. So Māori ward is one way that we can ensure that Māori are represented at the council table. I think my observation is that Wellingtonians have been very supportive of honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and we've heard from that today with some of the submitters, even though maybe they are grappling with some of the issues around this, that they are acknowledging that Te Tiriti o Waitangi plays an important role in this issue. We know that as a city and actually as a nation, we are facing a number of significant challenges. We have a housing crisis, we have a water crisis, and we have a climate crisis. So we have some really big issues, and Māori are disproportionately affected by these issues, particularly by homelessness, living in temporary accommodation and living in cold, damp homes. So it's really important that Māori are involved in this. They've been affected by these issues for generations, and it's critical that we as Māori are involved in solving the problems. We've had to wait 180 years. We've had 180 years of being done to and legislatively excluded, and that is changing now, and it's exciting. People might say, well, you and Councillor Tamitha Paul are on council, so you know Māori are represented here. But please remember that in 2016 we were told that I was the first Māori woman elected to Wellington City Council. That's not that long ago. And I was so astonished by that fact that I made council triple check that fact. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that we could be in 2016 and we were having records like that broken in this country. Over this announcement of the Māori ward, I've had a huge amount of positive responses from Wellingtonians. We're a public service city. Wellingtonians are well trained and schooled in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. You don't have to walk too far down the street before you talk to someone who's done a number of treaty training workshops. So the community shows a good understanding about the need to improve process and representation at decision-making levels for Māori. We saw with Te Reo Māori when we did the Te Tauihu policy, there was overwhelming positive feedback, and one of the things we heard was that people were struggling to enrol in Māori language courses. And I know that Councillor Pannett, when she went to enrol last year in a Te Reo course, was told that there were thousands of people on the waiting list. So I understand that you've successfully managed to get into a course this year, but that means that a record number of Wellingtonians are learning Te Reo Māori, so we know that Wellingtonians are on this journey with us. So why do we need this in local government? We know that local government would not exist without Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We are legitimate because of it. We are a part of the government processes. Last night I was involved in a Te Marawata Hui, which is a group of Māori elected members who who come together and talk about challenges and issues for Māori. It's a really great forum, and we had the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta speaking to us there. But it was really interesting because Tony Boynton, who has been a real champion of Māori ward in Whakatane, shared with us some of her experiences through the process of advocating for Māori ward. And she said in her council, since the Māori community have been coming out and advocating for Māori ward, they have begun to advocate on other issues that the city is making decisions about. So she's already seen a change in the engagement of Māori in the council because the conversation is happening about participation. Also, it's interesting to note that the only two councils who have been successfully implemented Māori ward had some opposition when they implemented it, as you'd expect, but that even the councillors who opposed it to begin with, following that implementation, have actually completely changed their viewpoint on it. They've seen that the sky didn't fall in, and they've actually seen that it's brought about some really great, robust decision making, and it has improved their governance. So 24 councils have tried, 22 have failed under the old system. So there's a reason why this council last year recommended not to do that, because at the point that we were discussing it, the opportunity to successfully get a Māori ward just wasn't there, and we were having to take the sad approach of saying we couldn't do it because we felt that that wasn't okay. But it's really encouraging to see and hear the proposal by staff, and that actually it's not going to cost us a huge amount of money to make sure that we are improving our representation for Māori. I also want to acknowledge Andrew Judd, the ex-Mayor of New Plymouth, and he made a really good comment recently that the negative opposition taps fear and ignorance, and he's very, very, very clear that he can say this because he was that person. He did feel that way, and he's very strong in saying we don't need to continue to feel that way. So I'm going to wrap up there. Māori voice must be at the table. It can't be left to chance. At the moment we leave it to chance. We have to get this right. The stakes are too high not to. I look forward to the debate and the support of my colleagues. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Councillor Fitzsimons is seconding. Would you like to speak now?
I'll reserve my right.
Okay, thank you. Oh, do I have agreement of the majority to add the change about going out to, or not going out to, but taking feedback from the wider community? Cool. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this? Thank you, Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much, colleagues, for the kōrero this morning and the late addition to paragraph 1. I have routinely expressed my measured support for a Maori ward in September last year in the exchange with Councillor Day. I mentioned that I'd be happy to propose a Maori ward. This appears to me to be the appropriate way by which representation should go forward. If we beat the petitioners, then it will be a sustainable, powerful step forward that we can all join in. Any other way, I fear, will be divisive and destructive. So my concern around this has not been about having someone who's a representative of Māori in Wellington at the table. It's really about not getting the community on board. We have got a very powerful work program and development by the head of Māori partnerships that I supported in budget last week. And we need our community to back that. For me to have to go to the suburbs in which I represent and ask them to disrupt and change in a way which is not well understood or supported will be a backward move and will be divisive. So thank you for allowing our residents to participate in this feedback process. I'm struggling a wee bit because some of the things, Councillor Day, you say are very difficult for me to hear. The narrative that the early settlers stole land and have shut out Māori from decision making is equally divisive, and frankly is actually quite offensive to me, at least. The treaty is a very simple document with 3 articles, 4 actually, but 3. And the Crown do rule Pākehā, not Māori, the Crown. And that is not contested in any way, by any shape or form. Article the 2nd, the chiefs, they will look after their lands and estates and their people, not Pākehā. And of course the 3rd makes us all British subjects, which obviously is interesting when we think about who's actually in charge. But nevertheless, the influence
of the treaty are you referring to just there?
The Treaty of Waitangi, right? 3 articles, Article 1st, Article 2nd, I think. Well, I don't use a transliteration. Actually, I use the English. Thank you. Otherwise, I would get tied up. You know, the fact is that the early settlers were not trying to do away with Māori or upset them or anything, but the opportunities that brought from living in cities did bring Māori, maybe not the rangatira of the different iwi, into the cities, and that's created an issue where they weren't looked after, and we still are not looking after those folks in a way that I think represents a 21st century democracy. So anyway, I'm going to support this motion as amended on the basis that I will be looking to hear from our community as to what they think. I recognise that there is some cost involved. It's we can always say there's always cost involved. I don't think it's immeasurable or obscene. So I will be supporting this.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora koutou. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Councillor Rush, for bringing that issue about giving the opportunity for a wider community input into this, and so that's kind of my suggestion that we've come with the wording and I'm really happy that we're doing that, and we don't want to silence people, we do want to hear from them. However, I guess when you talk about bringing the community with us, I also think we need to lead, and I think that is what we're elected to do, and that we have to be careful that we don't slow things down to the level of sort of the lowest common denominator. And, actually, unless we're making a change far too late, there will be some people who object to this. Maybe if we did it in 100 years, there wouldn't be anyone. But, sometimes I think the changes that we make, they seem that they're too late if they're not uncontroversial at all. So, we do need to kind of lead. And I sort of think about I note the points that you made, Councillor Day, about people in the city and their treaty training. And, I think about my experience. I grew up on the North Shore of Auckland. I didn't know many Māori people. Māori language was not part of my education. The te tiriti was not part of my education. So it was when I went to university that I became exposed to this. And when I was there, and I'm aging myself here, in the mid-90s, I went through a process through our student association where we restructured representation for Māori students. When I got there, Māori students were funded as a club and went to our club's funding grants. And, so we kind of went through a process where we, worked out kind of resource sharing, power sharing, and, that was a long time ago now. And, I mean, it does seem to me that this council, we have got a bit of catching up to do. And so I'm excited that we're doing at this point. And I also, I had a note to mention Andrew Judd, who, was an inspiring figure and has really, I think, helped bring about change. And as a Pākehā supporter of the leadership that you've displayed, Councillor Day, you're just not just a nice school teacher lady, you're also, a very inspirational Māori leader who has done so much for our city in that short time that wahine Māori have been represented around this table. And also I feel the same way about Councillor Paul. So it's great to have you here to help lead us through this process. I guess, when I think about what Councillor Rush was talking about, our history, I mean, that's not my understanding of our history at all, in that it is a history of stolen land and shut out people, and actually in our treaty training, which I want to thank you, Councillor Day, for I know you championed that, I keep going back to that list where we saw, just it was measure after measure after measure after measure deliberately taken to disempower Māori. And it was a systematic program of disenfranchisement. And so that was really informative to me. It really opened my eyes to see it as a deliberate program. And when Māori kind of creatively would shift and try and do something different to, then the Crown would find a way to stop it. So I really want to thank that training. It was a really great moment and helped me in this journey on this council. And I guess just the other thing I just want to talk about looking after, because you talked about looking after, Councillor Rush, and I guess this, in a way, Māori ward and actually making sure, with mana whenua representation also, that we're kind of moving beyond looking after, and it's actually not our job to look after. It's, Māori are completely capable of looking after themselves, and so, and being at the table as an equal partner. So I'm really relishing this change and how exciting it will be for Whanganui-a-Tara. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi. Councillor Pennant.
Kia ora. Well, I'd just like to also acknowledge your leadership, Councillor Day, on this. It's been very important, and also Councillor Paul, of course. It's been a pleasure to learn from you. So my questions this morning were quite deliberate. So first of all, it's not just what my understanding might be or your understanding or whatever. Our understanding of our past is informed by Māori knowledge through oral traditions. It's backed up by very rigorous Western scholarship. I've done some of that sort of stuff. It's what historians do, uncover the truth about our past. It is not for people to actually say, oh, well, I'm not quite sure if that's right. Bring the evidence. Put it on the table and let's have a look at it. And what we know, unfortunately, is that history is bolstered by the experience of Indigenous peoples all around the world, particularly that were colonised by the English. And, that some of us come from that tradition where we did colonise and then we continue to. And now that's not about white guilt, it's just about understanding and then taking some responsibility where possible and making positive change. And I was really curious to hear this response that, oh, this affects me. Well, in what way? What are you losing out? Well, actually, the argument I think is that you're winning by having the treaty principles honoured properly. Being an honourable person, of course, is what I was taught as a Christian, to actually do your part when you have an agreement. To not uphold an agreement is very unethical. Probably against the word of God too, but we won't get into that as well. So I think this is, I have strong views on that, but I won't bore you with them now. So that's right. So I think this is, this is a fantastic day for the council, and I think it's just going to bring so much. And, again, the submitter made well, what's this got to do with water? It's got everything to do with water. It's got everything to do when we do our spatial plan or we do our transport system and all the rest of it. We'll just get this amazing knowledge and amazing perspective, and we might not always agree. That's fine. In partnerships, you don't always agree. And we'll just be so much richer, so much more just, have better outcomes, because of course we know that because of colonisation we've got so many systemic failings for young Māori, and so it's got to be fixed. So I am incredibly positive about this. The only thing I would say though is that water is a very Western construct, so I possibly not, I possibly, I am a Western construct. So I look forward to seeing all the other ways that we can partner too. This is obviously just one way of achieving good, positive change. And as Councillor Foon says, making good things happen was her slogan. I think we can tick that one off today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Wolf.
Okay. We have a responsibility to represent all Wellingtonians, and in that respect, in respect to our iwi citizens of Wellington, that includes the local whānui of Te Atiawa, Taranaki and Ngāti Taha also. Kenny Jean brought up earlier that Wellington is quite unique. We also have, by virtue of being Aotearoa, New Zealand's capital, there is representation from all the tribes from all around our country. We are not Te Urawera, where the vast majority of the constituency is Ngā Tūhoi. In that respect, our consultation with Māori needs to be wider than other constituencies, and I'm actually really glad as to what we've put in. It also needs to be wider than the iwi representation who council regularly engage with. That's really important. This notice of motion seeks to address past wrongs. My view is we move forward. From a personal perspective, I have been conflicted. I've heard a lot of different sides that have validity. Tony Randall brought forward some really great points. The electoral imbalance is one aspect. Our priorities and cost is another. Our budget is seriously under stress at the moment. I'm also cognizant that for a lengthy time, and going back to the treaty, there has been an imbalance, and it's an imbalance where Pākehā has acted in governance roles within iwi. Most tribes around Aotearoa, New Zealand, have Pākehā included in their forward-thinking approach, and especially with regard to business. I'm proud to say I have a family member who has been intrinsic to Ngāti Whātua's successful treaty claim and their subsequent business successes. In over 180 years, Aotearoa has developed some wonderful governors, both Pākehā and Māori. And in Māoridom, and over the years, I've seen him worked with a whole truckload of absolutely amazing, fine governors. And I would include the likes of Georgina Bayer, Farah Palmer, Mark Tume, Michelle Hippolyte, who was the first Wahine Toi Hoatu, the CEO at Te Papa, and the current Minister of Local Government's father, Sir Robert Mahuta. All those people were absolutely wonderful and gave a great deal of wisdom and mana to the jobs that they performed, and in their governance roles particularly. If there's a shred of a chance that our city could attract a city councillor of that ilk and that mana, I would like to give that opportunity a chance of happening. We need to weigh up being more inclusive and not exclusive.
Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you. I think there's been some really interesting points made, but Councillor Panner, it's very unusual for you to use a religious argument in any of your... All right, cool. Look, I think for me, actually, it was about learning in our training initially at the beginning of this triennium that the Local Government Act actually requires us to work towards genuinely involving Māori in our decision-making processes. And I think that we have reached the point where genuinely involving Māori in our decision-making processes needs a real step up. So I'm very supportive of this, and I think Councillor Day and Councillor Paul, and in fact a lot of other people have worked on this too. So I think there's a lot of staff that have worked on it. There's a lot of people to be grateful for this. And I come from a similar background to Councillor Rush. My ancestors came to Wellington in 1840. So they were amongst the people who benefited from a very close working relationship with iwi. In fact, they wouldn't have survived, to be really frank, if it hadn't been for the help and cooperation of the local Māori people who helped them set up farming and worked very closely with them. And I've always felt this triennium, it was my turn to repay that manakitanga and that sense. I think that we don't want to lose sight of the fact that actually there was a partnership. It may not have been a perfect partnership, but in the early days there was a sense, I think, that there was something that could be built together. And it was interesting that someone referred to the Western construct that we're now in. We cannot go back to the past. We're actually in a place now where what our future is to learn to work better together. And that's not just for iwi, that's for many other cultures that are here in Wellington as well. But iwi have primacy in that idea of having to work together through the treaty. I'm certainly going to support this. I think we're standing at the cusp of something quite important, and we will be on the right side of history by supporting this. It's really important. It won't be the only thing we're going to have to do to build a more genuine connection and, to involve Māori and our local iwi in a more genuine way in our decision making. But it's a very important step, and that's probably all I need to say. I will say, however, that I do understand some sense of difficulty in hearing some of the things that are said, and I don't want us to lose sight of all of our history. So for me personally, the idea of getting rid of some of those monuments, the Wakefield Monument, for example, is not the right way to go. The right way to go is to acknowledge that that was part of our history and to add to that with perhaps a better understanding of the other side, because it has been quite one-sided. The monuments and the things that have been put in place physically in our city, I think, have been very unfairly one-sided. And I had a sense of this when I went to New Plymouth over the weekend and saw a statue there to the guy who actually surveyed New Plymouth and cut it all up. And I thought, who actually made the sections that were sold. And I thought, now with what I know, how difficult that must be for some people to see that. But nevertheless, it is history, it is what happened. And I don't think that the way forward is to pretend that what happened didn't happen, but to actually layer on top of that a richer and a more fuller understanding. But that's just my own perspective.
Kia ora, Councillor Young.
So just very briefly, I have already told the Chair that I won't be voting for this. The reason is I have two priorities, and one of them is the water infrastructure, which is a huge, it's like top priority. And the second thing is to make sure that we keep our rates increased to a minimum, and therefore, as the arts and events, etc., portfolio lead, I've had to accept things like we have to slow some projects down because we just don't have the money. I think this is a distraction from making sure that we don't have shit running down the streets, etc. And so therefore, my top priorities are water infrastructure and affordable rates, and so I won't be supporting this because I think it's a distraction financially and officer time.
Councillor Condé.
Kia ora, thank you. I will be voting in support of this because I think I've seen firsthand the benefits of having Māori at this table. It's been a great privilege to work with Councillor Day and Councillor Paul so far this term. I think it's made me a better person as well as a better councillor. Getting to spend time with them and learn from them and their experiences. I also think it's really important that that Māori are the ones who have the mana to lead change on these kinds of issues. Personally, while I support this wholeheartedly, I don't feel like I, as a Pākehā woman, would have the mana to lead on this issue if Councillor Day and Councillor Paul weren't at the table. And I think that's really important for our continued progress in this area. We can't rely on the fact that hopefully somebody through one of the other wards will be at the table. We have to ensure that going forward there will always be a Māori voice at this table, someone who will have the mana to lead on change in terms of moving this partnership forward for us. And I think that that's really, really important. I'd like to thank Councillor Rush and Deputy Mayor Free for acknowledging that this is going to be a difficult conversation, that you find it a difficult conversation, and parts of our community are going to find this a very difficult conversation. I think the important thing for me is that we conduct this in a way that it's done with respect, and that people who are participating in the conversation are well informed, and that this conversation doesn't subject our Māori community to further harm from racism to the extent that we can make that happen. And so I'd just like to really thank councillors who worked on the change this morning to this. I think it's a good compromise. I know that officers when putting together this idea that we would target engagement at Māori communities, had some of that concern at heart about how we keep them safe. But I also acknowledge, Councillor Rush, that people are going to have strong views about this, and we do need to hear from them. and be willing to accept that feedback. I guess what I would like to encourage all of our councillors or implore you is that if you are speaking to people in your community who strongly oppose this, that as councillors we work hard to make sure that that conversation remains respectful and well informed. They absolutely have their right to express their views, but I think we all have a role to play as leaders to make sure that we conduct this conversation in public in a way that respects our Māori communities. And, we've got our lovely media here today as well, and I just wanted to acknowledge that Stuff have done this recent work on Our Truth and Tamato Pono, and the apology that's come from historically racist coverage in journalism, and just invite our media and to be part of that effort as well, to make sure that this is a conversation that's conducted respectfully and that's conducted in a way that's very well informed with our community. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Sparrow.
It is pretty obvious that there are those who are very enthusiastic about putting a Māori ward or wards in place in Wellington. But at the other end of this spectrum, we're aware there are some in the community very much opposed to the concept for a variety of reasons. And I think there are also many in the middle who don't have closed minds on this proposal but do have genuine questions. And for example, is it really necessary to give Māori an additional voice by this means? Are we not already gaining a Māori perspective on pretty much every issue affecting Wellington? Is this proposal something that Māori in Wellington are actually seeking? It has been suggested we're putting the cart before the horse on this one. We're being asked to support the proposal in principle, subject to consideration of feedback from targeted engagement with mana whenua and Māori, and then there's the additional wording as part of the amendment. But are we being asked to agree to something in principle before there's actual clarity over whether it is in fact wanted, or are we assuming that to be the case? I have little doubt that the proposal will go through with or without my vote. But until those earlier questions have been answered to my satisfaction, and they still haven't been, I'm reluctant to support it.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. This topic is very sensitive because what it involves. I've heard a lot of people speaking, and I support a lot of what's being said. I mean, inevitably, I think we will see a Māori ward, and it is appropriate. I'm just not convinced that this way of going about it is the right way to do that. It's the outcome. What do we want to see? And look, I know back in August last year, we were about to renew our memorandum of understanding with mandated iwi, and that was put on hold because of, we're not quite sure why, but the relationships with iwi. In the end of August, there was a notice of motion for iwi representation on our committees, and we haven't seen anything further of that. Then we've got another notice of motion about a Māori ward. And you can say that those are all individual aspects, but do they tell a bigger story, a broader story about Māori representation, iwi representation? I don't know. And that's why I think, Councillor Conde, you were talking about being well informed. And my concern in terms of this is that we're going out for consultation. Are we well informed? Do we know what's going to be said out there? We don't know. Normally when we're going out for consultation, we have Well, look, no, I'm just saying we understand how information's being presented. We don't have that consultation document in front of me. And I know what I'm saying many around this table may not agree with me, but it's important that you can hear an alternative view and that you hear that alternative view with respect. Because, rather than just, shooting the alternative view down all the time. So I hope you do hear me with respect. So as I said, I look at our strategy and policy committee agenda and I see non-voting members on here of our mandated iwi. I haven't seen them around the table. I haven't heard what they've got to say. And I'm really interested to hear what they've got to say. We don't have that dialogue with them, even at the moment. And Councillor Sparrow, you made comments about hearing, what they've been saying, and we don't know. So look, I think just about 12 months ago, we made a decision to do our next representation review in 2023. I think that's the right time to do this. So we have a well-informed view at the time. We have to look at how our city is represented as a whole. And so I'm really keen to see that we work towards that time frame. So given that, I've heard a lot of comments about Western, and obviously representing the Wharongi-Onslow Western Ward. But I just want to point out, I know, well, I'm sure we'll get some comments about the demographic of the ward, but I just want to say that it is important to hear different views, and the area is actually, I just want to give you a little bit of, everybody seems to be giving some history lesson, I'll give you a little bit of history lesson here. Back in, when it was the Onslow Borough, which before it joined Wellington City, in 1902, they elected an African-American mayor. So I'll send you the link. He served for 5 years. And so look, we can be progressive in many different ways, but I think the right way to go about this is to look at doing a full representation review, include Maori wards in there, but let's give an opportunity to actually hear from our iwi on this as well. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Thank you. I think there's no doubt that today is an historic turning point for this council in our role in upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And I actually joked to Councillor Day this morning that PhD students in the future will study today's meeting. And it will be an interesting insight into the times, I think, particularly given that much of the opposition does tend to acknowledge that the arc of history will get us to this point at some stage, and the main opposition seems to be around timing or process. And I guess I wanted to particularly acknowledge the Mayor, Andy Foster, for his support of this, because I think it's a very powerful symbol that our Mayor is supporting this. And I think that's a very strong message to Wellington. But I also want to acknowledge the work of Councillor Jill Day. Jill Day of Tawa will go down in the history books as someone who has made a significant contribution to this council. You will have a genuine legacy of achieving results for Māori, of the commitment to Wellington becoming a te reo city, to mana whenua seats around the table being adequately paid for their time and their expertise, and now hopefully for a Māori ward as well. And not every councillor leaves such a legacy. It is unusual, and I just want to acknowledge your leadership, because it is astonishing that you were the first Māori woman elected to the City Council. We cannot leave it up to chance in the future. And I think for me, that's what a Māori ward is about. It's about ensuring that Māori are guaranteed a seat at the table. I remember the first treaty training I ever went to. It was done by Moana Jackson, who is a national treasure up at Victoria University, and he talked about how before colonisation he did a row of chairs, and before colonisation Māori were at the front of the queue, and then he brought in the Queen and the colonisers, and then he moved the chair right to the back of the queue, and he talked about the violent and oppressive history of colonisation in New Zealand, and nobody was left in any doubt that unless we uphold Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we're not going anywhere close to meeting our commitments under international law But also, and I want to pick up on the comments that Councillor Rush made around the role of the Crown, because when I studied law at Victoria University, they certainly talked to us about the important cases that led to the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, but also of the legitimacy of the New Zealand state and local government resulting from Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And that was a core part of understanding my role as a lawyer and my duty to the court and my duty to the Crown. And I think that this council can makes important decisions every day for the future of our city, and the only way those important decisions are legitimate is if we uphold Te Tiriti o Waitangi as we make them. And I want to talk about the issues that people raise around timing. We just in the agenda item before this one talked about the historic failure to invest in water infrastructure. The thing that I think is exciting about having a councillor elected through a Māori ward is that the Māori worldview is not just this year and last year and the next few years. It is a long-term view of what's in the interests of the land, the water and the people. And I think that if we'd had a councillor elected under a Māori ward in the past, we may not have seen the failures in investing in water infrastructure and our failures in providing affordable housing and the major challenges we're facing with climate change. There's a really famous quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, which I love, and it talks about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think the establishment of Māori Ward at Wellington City Council is a step in a process in that arc towards the justice of upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So I'm so proud to support this, and I do genuinely think today is a historic day for the City Council.
Kia ora, Mayor Foster.
Yeah, look, and I was pleased to support this as well, so, and thanks, Jill, for bringing it to us. For me, this is about the concept of people being able to be represented in the way that they choose. And I think that's the important thing. With the information we've got is that there are enough people who are on the Maori roll at this stage in Wellington City to justify a Maori ward. And if the people who are on that role want to be represented through a Māori ward as opposed to being in a general ward, I think that that is the democratic process and we should be allowing for that to happen. I would make the comment that, of course, this is a full consultation. A lot of the debate sounds as though we've actually made the decision already. So we are actually going to consult to see what iwi want, to see what Māori want. And I'm grateful that you've included that we will see what other feedback we get as well. So it's for consultation, and we'll see whether the arc of history bends and we can have all these speeches again in a couple of months' time to say, great stuff. So look forward to that. The two issues which I had with this when we started the process were, one was, did we have enough people in the role? Answer, tick, yes we do. And the second one is how it relates to the representation review generally. And Karipa, thank you for giving us the numbers on that. So if we go down this track, then what happens is we will have to do the representation review. We were going to do that in 3 years' time, but we're going to need to do that now if we do that. And I'm just looking at the numbers actually work pretty well, with the exception, and I think we know that, the exception of the south and the east of the city, where we are we're pretty much duty-bound democratically to do a boundary adjustment, because at the moment the south will be 19% underrepresented and the east will be 10% overrepresented. So it's best part of 30% difference. That's quite a lot, so we are going to need to do something about that. That's part of the
representation review. Let's focus on Māori Ward.
Yeah, but this drives the representation review too, so that's why
But we don't need to get into the details of it.
No, but Madam Chair, I just thought I wouldn't repeat everything that everybody else has said, but I would add something that people haven't mentioned, so I thought I'd do that. But look, I'm pleased to support this. I look forward to the consultation, and I look forward to the feedback we're going to get, and then to actually making a decision on it in a couple of months' time.
Kia ora. Thank you everybody for your kōrero and what you've shared. I have a few things to respond to, but not too much. I think people have done a really good job of sharing their perspective. I just want to start by saying that I'm sorry, Councillor Rush, that the truth is offensive. It is hard for us to hear when things are challenging, but actually all of the conversation today really reminds me, when we're talking about Wellington City and the proportion of Māori and how that might be fair or unfair, shows how successful colonisation was. when you read the history from a Māori perspective, iwi were pushed to the outskirts of the city and actually right out of the city. So when we're looking at the proportion and representation now, that is why it is so problematic and so challenging, because it was so successful. But what my response to that is, let's keep working together. We do have to identify and address that there has been harm, but we can move together and have a positive future. Councillor Matthews, I think you made some really good points, and I found the treaty training really interesting, and you always learn something when you attend treaty training. There is never a full knowledge of everything that could possibly have happened in the last 180 years and even before that. One of the things that struck me as a Māori descendant was how my whānau were affected by the education system with racism. So being shown an early school journal article that was essentially telling Māori that they weren't at the same level as Pākehā, and that had an impact on the behaviours and the way that Māori felt about themselves, and I saw that play out in my whānau. So I found that training quite moving, and also quite really sharpened my focus on why it's so important to progress this. Councillor Wolf, you talked about the electoral imbalance, and I think, again, I just want to say we need to think about the fact that that's come about because of a process which was fairly vigorous and deliberate. And that I think we also need to acknowledge that this is inclusive. This process is about making sure that Māori are included by right, not by chance. Deputy Mayor Free, your comments are really welcome and warm, and I think that's really important, that you are bringing something from your tupuna with the manaakitanga that you show, and you are challenging us to think about where we want to be in history, so thank you. Councillor Young, I hope that Māori don't hear the message that they are a distraction, because they should never think that.
Not saying Māori were a distraction.
You're saying that this is a distraction.
No, I said the whole thing about consultation and the focus on the work behind consultation is a distraction when we have bigger things to think about.
Point taken, but unfortunately the ramifications for that is that Māori get pushed to the side again. So I just want to make sure that Māori don't feel that this is an imposition on community, because there will always be, Councillor Calvert, you're talking about priorities and things that need to happen. There will always be things that we could say are more important. There is always a very busy work agenda. There are always LTPs, APs, other big consultations. At some point we need to take some leadership and say we need to make this decision. And I have to say that through Te Tauihu, I heard the same arguments come from you about process and cost, and I think that we've got to get past that and
Point of order, I don't think I talked about process or costs at all.
We can go back and watch it, but I do remember that impression.
Yeah. Well, I think we're talking about this particular debate, not about another debate which
so my impression is that
different.
That is a repeating pattern.
I did say, can we try and treat alternative views respectfully? Thank you.
Councillor Sparrow, I think it's important you acknowledge, you talked about Māori perspective and that being included in local government, and we do have a Māori perspective shared with us, but that's different to Māori being involved in decision making. So I think there is important difference to note there. And Councillor Calvert, I just really want to speak to your comment about Māori mana whenua being on our agenda and not turning up. That is really, really hard to hear. We don't pay iwi, we don't pay mana whenua people to come and sit at this table. We are paid to be here, and it's very hard to expect people who have full-time jobs to put that aside and come and sit here for half a day, sometimes a whole day, and have to do all of the work without being paid, and they don't get to vote either. So it's very hard to hear that is being used as a reason to not see the value in it.
No, it's not. It's one of those aspects, and can you just not take me out of context? One of the things is here, we've already got a notice of motion about looking at iwi representation rights. We haven't even had that piece of work come back to us. I'm just saying it was in the context of all of that.
No, but I'm pointing out that you lifted your piece of paper up and pointed to them not coming, so that is a fact. I'd like to thank you, Mayor Foster, for your support of this. I really do appreciate it. It is really strong to have a Mayor of the capital city supporting Māori to be at this table through Māori Ward. I just do want to acknowledge that this is about engagement, not consultation, so the process is slightly different. If we were doing consultation, we'd have submissions and that sort of thing. Yeah, but I do want to acknowledge that this is not a referendum. This is not about us coming back here and saying 60% of people said no, 40% of people said yes. What we want to do is to understand where people are at with their understanding of it, with what we need to do as far as implementation and making sure that we are bringing the community with us. And that's why I have really appreciated the constructive input of councillors and the community on how we can approach that. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge this is an opportunity to listen and to hear and to help that guide us in how we communicate with the community. So let's vote. Yes, let's take a division. Oh, kia ora. That's fantastic, thank you. So what I'll do now is I will, we will move into public excluded, and then we may need to think about having a break, but we'll do the process of going into public excluded because I know that there's some journalism students that would like to talk to us. In fact, maybe we'll have a bit of a break first and then go into PE. We might actually take about a half an hour break. Let's go into PE and then we'll take a short break and that gets everyone sorted out and we can be making the most of our time. All right, so officers recommend the public is excluded for the following part of the proceedings of this meeting. So you can see what those reasons are in our papers. I don't need to read that out to you. So I'm going to move the motion. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. That's it. Oh, yes, sorry, we agree. It's not on here. It's not on there. So number 2 is that we agree to the public release of the information by the 30th of April. So just so that everybody's clear, let's vote.
Who seconded?
I know.
Who seconded it?
Oh, who seconded that? O'Neill, sorry. I really do need to eat something. And
I think we should just have lunch, yeah? It's up to 12.
Well, why don't we come back at 5:02? That's half an hour. We can do that if we're really quick. Or I need to have a break. I actually do physically need to have a break. About half an hour would be fine.